I'll be quick. Okay. Well, this briefing, while very extensive and long, posed far more questions than it ever answered. Their plan for the U.S. running Venezuela is vague, based on wishful thinking, and unsatisfying. I did not receive any assurances that we would not try to do the same thing in other countries. And in conclusion, when the United States engages in this kind of regime change and so-called nation building, it always ends up hurting the United States. I left the briefing feeling that it would again.
Who did the briefer say is running Venezuela?
Let me give you a statement here. I want to be very precise. I don't typically read from notes, but I want to be very precise about what we've heard and what we're facing here. So I'm going to share with you some thoughts on paper here. Let me say this with regard to the top line on all of this. The U.S. military operation in Venezuela was a decisive and justified action. Nicolas Maduro is responsible for the deaths of untold thousands of Americans after years of trafficking illegal drugs and violent cartel members into our country. This is undisputed, and everybody agrees with it. These are crimes for which he's been indicted in U.S. courts, and an arrest warrant was duly issued. And now he has learned what accountability looks like. Under President Trump, the United States will no longer allow criminal regimes to profit from wreaking havoc and destruction on our country. He's putting Americans first and succeeding where others have failed, and this is very clear. This operation demonstrated the unmatched precision and effectiveness, professionalism, and capability of the U.S. military. There's no other force on planet Earth that can do what we can do. And it produced an outcome only America's armed forces could achieve. Our brave military personnel who executed this successful operation with speed and precision and power deserve our gratitude and our congratulations. You should sleep a little better at night knowing that we have this great force. The Maduro regime functioned as a criminal organization masquerading as a government. This was not a legitimate president of a country. It systematically used the instruments of the Venezuela state, which is its military, its intelligence services, and its territory, to facilitate trafficking drugs into the United States. These activities were conducted in coordination with designated narco-terrorists and transnational criminal organizations that are very dangerous, directly threatening the U.S.'s sovereignty and public health and national security. The Biden administration, the previous team, offered a $25 million bounty for information leading to Maduro's arrest, following a successful 2020 indictment. Maduro had multiple opportunities to change course and cooperate with international law enforcement, and he chose not to do that. And now he's going to face the full force of American justice on U.S. soil. Congress continues to exercise oversight of U.S. military operations and closely track the situation. Tonight's briefing to the Gang of Eight was a part of that. This briefing was the 20th bipartisan briefing on military operations involving Venezuela so far. The administration has scheduled an all-member briefing on Wednesday, and I don't know if it's confirmed while we were in there, but it will be midweek. With regard to the war powers and the compliance with federal law, we are not at war. We do not have U.S. armed forces in Venezuela, and we are not occupying that country. The Constitution gives Congress the power to declare war, that is true, but it also vests the President of the United States with vast authorities as Commander-in-Chief. Under Article 2 of the Constitution, the President has the authority, as all presidents do, to deploy military forces to address threats to the U.S. and to enforce U.S. law. That is what happened here. The War Powers Act states that notification should be made to Congress within 48 hours following the initiation of hostilities. As we've noted, and I've made many public comments, that happened almost instantaneously here. My first call was at 4 a.m. by Secretary of State Rubio. Despite the claims by some of my colleagues, under the War Powers Act, there is no requirement for prior congressional approval or prior notification. And in fact, in this case, the intelligence was so sensitive, the conditions had to be perfect, there was no predetermination of when exactly it would occur. And if there had been prior notice, even assembling the Gang of Eight, for example, during the December holiday, it would have set off alerts and very likely might have been a leaked situation which could have caused great damage to our forces, our troops there. Any claims to the contrary about the War Powers Act either misunderstand the statute and longstanding precedent, or they're just being disingenuous. Congress retains full oversight authority, and the administration is acting consistent with the law, and that's what we discussed in the room tonight. I'll close with this. With regard to international law, there's been a lot of question about that. It is important to point out the United States has never accepted any interpretation that the UN Charter limits the use of force solely to responses to armed attacks. The U.S. has always maintained the right to use force to defend our national interest, to preserve the safety of the American people, and to prevent ongoing threats to its security. Venezuela's state-sponsored drug trafficking constituted a persistent violation of U.S. sovereignty and a direct threat to the safety of our citizens, and the President was justified in taking action to stop it. I'll take just a couple questions. Manu.
You said the United States is not occupying Venezuela. So how is the United States going to run Venezuela, like the President said repeatedly, saying that the United States is in charge of Venezuela? And how much is this going to cost the United States taxpayers in terms of dollars and troops?
Look, some of these things were discussed in the SCIF. I want to say that the way that this is being described, I think, is accurate. This is not a regime change. This is a demand for change of behavior by a regime. The interim government is stood up now, and we are hopeful that they will be able to correct their action. They cannot participate with narco-terrorists and very dangerous international criminal organizations that harm and target Americans, frankly, and traffic all of these dangerous drugs into our country, that do all this great harm to our country. They cannot continue that activity. We have a way of persuasion because their oil exports, as you know, have been ceased, and I think that will bring the country to a new governance in very short order. So we don't expect troops on the ground. We don't expect direct involvement in any other way beyond just coercing the interim government to get that going. Look, I expect that there will be an election called in Venezuela. I mean, some of these things are still being determined, of course, but it should happen in short order, and I think it will need to be so that their economy can remain stabilized and the country can remain stabilized.
Rubio.
Look, this is still developing right now, obviously. This has all just happened within the last couple of days, and so there are more questions ultimately about how it resolves probably than answers at the moment, but that's to be expected. We took out a serious threat. We removed a serious threat in terms of an arrest, an indictment, then an arrest, and now bringing to justice, again, in America, on our soil, of someone who is doing great harm to our country. And we need the country of Venezuela now. The people cheering in the streets, elated by this outcome, as you've seen, they now can have that freedom in Venezuela again. They have vast natural resources, as you know, and if they act accordingly and as a good partner in our hemisphere, they will have a very bright future, and we're all very hopeful for that. I know the people of Florida in particular who feel this so acutely have been having parties in the streets because they know what this means. And there were Floridians in the briefing here, most notably the Secretary of State, who understands these issues and those dynamics as well as anyone. Look, I can tell you, as Speaker of the House, as the person who's in charge of defending Article I powers, I'm just going to insist to you that those have not been traversed in any way by what happened here. The President used his authority under the law. He did so in a way that caused no casualties on the American side, and got the job done with exquisite intelligence and extreme precision that can only be done by the U.S. That's why we are the world's great and last superpower, and we stand for justice, and you're going to see that meted out here. It's overdue, and everyone will be safer because this has happened. So stay tuned for the further development.
How long will this transition period last?
Is there an OLC opinion?
We could do a repeat on some of these?
Mr. Chairman, what did
Explain if the administration talked about what the next targets are beyond Venezuela, whether it's Colombia, Cuba, and do they take any of that off the table?
Look, everybody has questions. Everybody in a lot of rooms and circles has questions about what happens for other nations in the region, right? And questions were answered about that. But the administration has been very clear. This was a law enforcement activity that had to be supported by the military because the person being taken into custody was supported by an Air Force, an Army, a Navy, Russian surface-to-air missiles, things like that. You had to have U.S. military capabilities to support our FBI, our DEA, right? So unless there's a warrant that has to be enforced in some way, in the same way that has to be enforced against Nicolas Maduro, then you shouldn't expect to see anything else take place in that way, right? That was a specific law enforcement function. That's what was conducted. It was lawful, and law enforcement functions will take place in the future.
Mr. Chairman, who does the administration, the briefers, say is running Venezuela right now?
Right now, the previous vice president, now acting president, Delcy Rodriguez, is there running the country. It's an individual that has started to make comments about being willing to work with the United States, speak to the United States, keep those channels open. But as everybody should recognize, the United States of America, and as I spoke to some over there already, the Department of War, the Department of State, Department of Treasury, Commerce, our capabilities to maintain an order and stability in our hemisphere and specifically in our backyard and in the Gulf, those capabilities are unparalleled. What everybody saw on various videos with our Department of War and our law enforcement operations, unparalleled. Only the United States of America can do that. That is what peace through strength looks like. That demonstration of what your power is, sometimes that's all the control that you need.
Did the Attorney General provide you with an OLC opinion or any other sort of legal justification for the Venezuela op?
Attorney General Bondi gave us every legal justification that was required. Secretary of State Rubio laid out everything that was in his lane. Secretary of War laid out everything about the operations to include General Caine. And Director Ratcliffe laid out everything that supported, that needed to be laid out to support everything in each of those previously mentioned lanes. And all of it from before, during, and after, none of it for public attribution.
You mentioned Delcy Rodriguez. Was there any deal that was cut between the administration and Delcy Rodriguez in order for her to cooperate with the United States?
As far as I know, Delcy Rodriguez is an individual that did not have a warrant that was served against her. She remains in place. It's important to, as part of planning, to make sure there are people in place that know where the keys are so that you don't have a vacuum. Can take the phone calls of leaders in the region because they know which number is calling, right? Can have those communications and things take place so you don't have a vacuum, but not because this was an individual that was somehow, in the pocket of the United States of America in some kind of way. I'm not going to say that that's anything that I've been briefed on.
And Mr. Chairman, did the briefers explain what their intentions are and how they plan?
I'm going to take this and then I'll come over here.
Did the briefers,
Then I'm going to go.
Did the briefers explain how they intend to run Venezuela in the future, as the president said would happen?
Look, I don't know everything that's been said in open source media, but this should be clear to everybody. And again, I said this over there to some already. This administration has never been a protracted war administration from 45 to 47. It's limited operations. The bombing in Syria against Bashar al-Assad when he was gassing his people, the hitting of Qasem Soleimani in Iraq, putting him into 5 separate pieces on an Iraqi tarmac, the hitting of the Iranian nuclear sites, and now what's taken place in Syria. These things are done before breakfast. They don't do protracted war operations. They move, in this case, a specific law enforcement function that took place. That took a significant obstacle out of the way for the Venezuelan people to go chart a new future. It is absolutely up to the Venezuelan people to go and chart a new future. And this is something that I know the Secretary of State Rubio has been very clear about. There's going to be an opportunity for free and fair elections in the future. That is the hope, that however that plays out, they have that opportunity to chart their own future not this future that was, and I think this is where you see people like Schumer and others, they're trying to create these catch-22s, where they say, well, the United States of America didn't lay out this, and this for them, but at the same time, they want to say they have to have a free opportunity to chart their own future. You can't have your cake and eat it too. They have their opportunity to chart their own future. They're being given that opportunity. There is stability in the country. There's people keeping the lights on. There's something paying attention to making sure that they can, pay their bills, be in coordination with other nations in the region, in their backyard, whether Colombia, Brazil, or other places, and deal with the threats that brought these warrants to take place and bring them to bear in the first place. So, what's your question?
Well, just to be clear, though, are you comfortable, I know you mentioned Vice President Rodriguez was that you were comfortable with elements of the Maduro regime remaining in power at this time? And secondly, did the briefers rule out any further military action?
So I am not going to tell you what was ruled out or not ruled out by the briefers because it's not for attribution or whether it was even discussed, right? But what I will tell you in response to your question is there's a preference and there's what is the policy at the time. Everybody would love it to be the case that the people that were in power beneath Maduro were not Maduro loyalists. That would be everybody's preference, but that is not the reality. And to remove every single one of them, number one, would not be adhering to what was the law enforcement function of this because there were not warrants on everybody. And again, to specific planning, you would leave a vacuum if you took everybody out of place in that way, and there's never a goal to leave a vacuum in a situation like that where you have to have the United States of America bring boots in on the ground and create a presence like that. That would be a terrible plan of an operation. And so what you have in place is somebody that, while they wouldn't be the preference, they are in place, they are in communication with the United States of America, they know how to turn the lights on there, they know how to answer the phones, and they are also well aware that the Department of Navy is directly off the shores protecting the American homeland.
How would the U.S. just take the oil? How would the U.S. just go in there and take
What's up?
Would American boots on the ground be a mistake in Venezuela, Mr. Chairman?
It is never a mistake to protect the American homeland. No matter what, this president, as he's done from the beginning, he is going to protect the American homeland, whatever that means. He's going to use his Article 2 authority. In this particular case, he's going to use law enforcement authority against a narco-terrorist drug dealer that has been inviting in all of our adversaries, China, Russia, Iran, to essentially use their waters as a fleet week for their countries. And against the United States of America. The president is going to protect our homeland no matter what. But I think everybody should expect he will always continue to protect our homeland in the way that he has demonstrated he will do it from the 45 to the 47 administration, which I will say again, limited strike against Bashar al-Assad, there and gone. Limited strike against Qasem Soleimani, there and gone. Very specific plan to remove United States forces from war in Afghanistan, obviously personal to me, but not leaving behind military equipment or having 13 American service members killed in an abortion of an operation. Very limited strike on Iranian nuclear infrastructure so they can't do anything, bringing kilotons or megatons against us or anybody else in the world. Very limited strike against, not a strike, very limited law enforcement operation to bring in Maduro, supported by the military, because obviously he had military capabilities to bring to bear. You should expect that to continue.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
The president has talked about regime change. He's talking about putting in a government that is pro-America. So how is the U.S. going to do that without having a physical presence, a military presence in Venezuela? Or is that, because what the president has been saying, is that actually not going to happen?
The president has talked about, and Secretary Rubio has spoken about, wanting to see free and fair elections there, right? Obviously, we spoke about the individual, Delcy Rodriguez. Delcy Rodriguez is a person that I think everybody hopefully can acknowledge would not be a preferred partner, clearly a Maduro loyalist. You're not going to rise to the position of Venezuelan vice president under Maduro without being a Maduro loyalist. So not a preference of a partner, right? There's not a puppet being put into place right there right now. Everybody should be able to assess that on their own. There is a desire to see not a vacuum in place until you can get to a point in time where the Venezuelan people can have a free and fair election, not under the shadow of somebody like Maduro. So you're not going to get a date from me on when that would happen because it would be impossible to produce a date for when that would
but
happen.
Mr. Chairman, you say that the
What's your
Venezuelan-
follow-on?
Is the U.S. going to do anything to compel elections, to coerce elections? And also, should this serve as a model? A lot of your colleagues have been talking about coercion.
I don't really care if the word is coercion, intimidation, assessment, or anything else. This administration has taken a very important term, full weight and power of the United States of America. That's an important term that every other country and their intelligence assets assess. What is the full weight and power of the United States of America? And they're putting real meaning into that. And so whether our Ford Carrier group is in the waters directly off Venezuela or having a shore leave in Miami or whether they're across the world recognizes our capabilities. What they are against Russian-sold weapon systems, what they are against Chinese-sold weapon systems, and everything else. The capabilities that we can bring to bear, they recognize it in a very limited way based upon what they see on video. That is peace through strength. They recognize what can be brought to bear. They recognize what relationship with the United States of America looks like. It should be laughable that anybody looks at the globe and says, yeah, I want a future for my people that looks like that of Russia, Iran, North Korea, and Venezuela, those alliances and how they align with China. That's the future we want for our people versus that of the United States of America and our allies like Israel and Australia and Japan and our NATO and EU partners. It should be laughable that anybody should want anything different. And you can see that vividly, both in the strength that we bring to bear and the lifestyle that we bring to bear for people just because of the freedom that's offered. I'm going to make one last question, and it's going to be to somebody that hasn't asked a question. You haven't asked a question. Go ahead. And then I'm going to move on.
If violence does commence down there, right, we're hearing some reports that there were some shots or maybe explosions, it's unclear. But if violence ensues, what do you think the Americans should do? What should we do? Will there be boots on the ground to ensure the safety of the Venezuelans and the security down there?
I think the Venezuelan people and the acting president, Delcy Rodriguez, who has a capability over forces there. They don't have great military forces and capabilities to begin with, but has a control and command structure over that. That's why she's in place. Should work to maintain stability in there, and there's an expectation that stability will be maintained. But I think it would be unreasonable to think there aren't disruptors there. Iran has been there, China has been there, Russia has been there. There was a Chinese envoy that was there when these operations took place. China was trying to send a message to the United States of America. They know what an envoy means. When we send an envoy to Taiwan, China loses its mind over it. They know how serious it is to send an envoy somewhere. They were trying to send a message to America. Instead, they got a message that, and basically dictators across the globe got a message that China is not your hedge of protection. They're, a very cheap friend, a very cheap partner. And that's I think, a message that went out there. But they're still there, all of these entities that were there previously, with their tentacles wrapped around various groups, whether it be FARC or somebody else. They're there with their tentacles wrapped around, trying to create an instability. And I think anybody that wouldn't acknowledge that probably shouldn't be doing this work, right? You haven't assessed what's the reality of the world, right? We know that's just common sense that's taken place. So the acting VP will hopefully work against that and be able to, the acting president rather, will hopefully be able to work against that and provide a stability until they can get to the point that the country can have free and fair elections and chart a hopeful path for the Venezuelan people, one that doesn't send drugs and enemies to the United States of America, one that doesn't allow Hezbollah to fester directly off our shores and work to use it as a base for espionage and kinetic operations against the United States of America, if that's what they wanted to do, and one that's not destabilizing to the other partners in the region, like Brazil and like Colombia and others, but one that becomes a hope. And I think they have that opportunity. That's what the president has created there by bringing this person to justice, is the opportunity for hope. I wish you all the best.
Mr. Chair, is the United States
Thanks, guys.
considering